Adrien Broner made millions from boxing, but somehow, almost all of it disappeared. From gambling and a wild lifestyle to massive lawsuits and debts, his money went fast. And now, the man who once flushed cash down a toilet is asking strangers for Uber money. Here's how it happened. To understand how far Adrien Broner fell, you have to understand how high he actually got. This wasn't a guy who scraped by on club fights and small purses. Broner was, for a stretch in the early 2010s, one of the most talked about young fighters in the sport. He came out of Cincinnati, Ohio, copying Floyd Mayweather's shoulder roll defense so closely that people started calling him the second coming. He backed it up early. He won world titles in 4 different weight classes, a feat that a lot of boxers never manage in one. By the time he beat Paulie Malignaggi in 2013, he was already commanding paydays that most fighters his age could only dream about. That fight alone reportedly netted him roughly $1.5 million, according to reporting on his biggest paycheck up to that point. That was just one night's work in his mid-20s. The nickname stuck for a reason. Broner didn't just want to be rich. He wanted everyone to know he thought he already was. He copied Floyd Mayweather's shoulder roll and spending habits, then promised to build his own empire. For years, that's exactly what it looked like he was doing. He strutted into arenas draped in jewelry, talked like a man who could not lose, and fought on some of boxing's biggest stages for 7-figure paydays. Add up his disclosed purses across his career and the picture gets even bigger. Multiple breakdowns of his career earnings put his total career earnings in the $30 million range, which on paper sounds like the kind of financial cushion that should have set him up for life. Other estimates have landed lower, with some trackers pointing to career fight earnings closer to $3.5 to $4 million. But even the more conservative counts confirm the same basic fact. This was a man who made real money in the sport, multiple times over, across more than a decade of world title fights. The single biggest night of his career, financially, came in January 2019, when he stepped into the ring against Manny Pacquiao at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas for the WBA welterweight title. It was the biggest stage of Broner's career, and it came with the biggest single check of his life. That fight reportedly netted him $5 million, by far his largest documented purse. He lost the fight on the scorecards, but the payday was real, and it should have been the moment his finances finally matched his reputation. Instead, in the aftermath of that very payday, he created one of the most infamous images of his career. He filmed himself flushing stacks of $100 bills down a toilet, an act that perfectly embodied his about billions persona. It wasn't a rumor or a secondhand story. It was Broner himself, on camera, treating actual cash like it was disposable. For a guy who just banked the biggest paycheck of his career, it was a strange way to celebrate. But it fit the character he'd built for years. That character didn't come from nowhere. Broner's endorsement deals added another layer on top of his fight purses. He picked up sponsorships with major brands, and additional income came from endorsements with brands like Nike and Monster Energy. Other reporting has tied him to deals with Reebok and Roc Nation Sports as well, adding millions more on top of what he made just stepping into the ring. This was a fighter who by his mid-20s had built the kind of resume, titles, endorsements, pay-per-view, main events, that's supposed to set a career up for decades. And for a while, the results matched the bravado. He was winning. He was famous. He was, by his own branding, about billions. The problem is that a nickname isn't a bank statement, and the gap between the persona and the actual numbers was about to become the story of his entire post-prime career. Because here's the thing about that $30 million figure, and the $5 million Pacquiao payday, and the endorsement checks. None of it stayed put. The same reporting that documents how much Broner made is the same reporting that documents how little of it he kept. Modern estimates peg Adrien Broner's net worth at only a low 6-figure number, sometimes around $100,000, and that gap between $30 million earned and a modest net worth is what turned his downfall into a cautionary story that fans and other fighters keep replaying. That's the part that makes this story different from a normal career decline. This isn't a fighter who never made real money and struggled his whole life. This is a fighter who made real money, repeatedly, on some of the biggest stages boxing has to offer, and watched it disappear anyway. The toilet video wasn't just a wild moment for the cameras. Looking back, it was basically a preview of what was coming for the rest of his bank account. So how does a fighter go from flushing $100 bills for fun to publicly admitting he doesn't have a dime? That's where the spending, the lifestyle, and the pressure of supporting a massive extended family start to take over the story. Money doesn't just vanish. Somebody spends it, loses it, gives it away, or gets taken to court over it, usually some combination of all four. With Broner, it was all four, running at the same time, for years. Start with the obvious one, the lifestyle. Broner didn't build his brand quietly. The jewelry, the entourage, the constant flexing on social media, that wasn't just a persona for the cameras, it was how he actually lived. When reporters and fans have tried to explain where the money went, Broner himself hasn't exactly denied it. Broner has tried to explain how the money vanished so fast, and in interviews and social media posts, he brings up gambling, bad decisions, and the pressure of supporting a large extended family. That's not a small detail. Broner has talked openly about having 10 kids and a wide circle of family depending on him. When you're the guy who made the money, in a lot of these situations, you become the guy everyone calls when they need help. Rent, bills, emergencies. Combine that with a gambling habit he's acknowledged himself, and you've got two of the most common ways that fighters and athletes burn through fortunes, both happening in the same life at the same time. Then there's the part that turned private financial trouble into public spectacle. The lawsuits. Boxing is a sport where a lot of financial mismanagement stays behind closed doors. Broner's didn't. His legal troubles became just as much a part of his public story as his fights, and they started piling up well before his career earnings ran dry. The case that really cracked his finances open to the public happened in a Cuyahoga County courtroom in Cleveland. A woman had accused Broner of assaulting her in a Cleveland nightclub, and the resulting civil case ended with him ordered to pay more than $780,000 in damages and costs. Different reports have put the exact figure anywhere between roughly $780,000 and $855,000, but the shape of the story is the same across all of them. A judgment north of $750,000 that Broner simply did not pay. When he failed to pay, the court didn't just let it go. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo dragged him back to court to explain himself. And what Broner told the court became the most talked about financial admission of his entire career. He filed a statement saying he had just over $13 in cash. A man who'd made millions fighting on pay-per-view, standing in front of a judge saying he had $13. It's worth sitting with how strange that moment actually was. This is the same fighter who'd filmed himself destroying stacks of $100 bills for a social media post. Now, he was telling a judge under oath that his checking account had less money in it than a movie ticket costs. In that 2020 court appearance regarding the civil assault lawsuit, Broner shocked the courtroom by claiming he had only $13 in his checking account. When questioned about his ability to pay the judgment, Broner didn't shy away from the number afterward. If anything, he leaned into it. He started asking fans directly for help, turning his own legal humiliation into a social media moment. Following the 2020 judgment, he asked Instagram fans to send him $10 at a time. Other versions of the story have him asking for the same $13 figure from the courtroom, turning his own poverty plea into a literal Cash App campaign. Whichever exact number you go with, the pattern is the same. A 4-division world champion, publicly asking strangers online to send him spare change. Then came the bankruptcy filing. Facing the weight of that judgment and unable or unwilling to pay it, Broner went the legal route that a lot of people assume protects you from creditors entirely. In January 2021, he submitted a Wells Fargo bank statement to the court declaring his bankruptcy. On paper, that should have been the reset button. A formal legal acknowledgement that the money was gone and the debts needed to be restructured. Except that's not quite how it played out. Reporting on the filing has suggested the bankruptcy wasn't the clean financial reset it looked like from the outside. He ended up filing for bankruptcy in 2020, though it was later revealed to be a maneuver to avoid the reported $830,000 fine tied to the other case he found himself in. In other words, even the legal tool designed to formally deal with financial collapse became another chapter in a very public game of dodging one specific bill. And through all of this, Broner kept fighting, kept showing up for paydays, kept talking about turning things around. But the debts kept compounding faster than the purses could offset them. A civil judgment doesn't disappear just because you file paperwork. It sits there with interest. waiting. And while that Cleveland case was working its way through the courts, Broner was racking up other financial obligations elsewhere, debts that would resurface years later and keep the pattern going. By the time you add up the nightclub judgment, the bankruptcy filing, the public begging campaigns, and the acknowledged gambling and family pressures, you start to see how a $30 million career and a $5 million single payday could still end with a man asking the internet for $10 at a time. The money wasn't attacked from one direction, it was being drained from every direction at once, legally, personally, and publicly, and none of those leaks ever really got patched. So the debts didn't stop with that one Cleveland case. They followed him into the next few years, and they got personal in a different way. Not just courtrooms anymore, but jewelers, business partners, and eventually his own inner circle. By the mid-2020s, Broner's financial story had stopped being about one bad judgment. It had become a running theme, with new debts stacking on top of old ones that were never actually resolved. One of the more specific numbers to surface recently involves jewelry. Fitting, given how central diamond chains and watches were to Broner's original About Billions image. Recent reporting has surfaced news of Broner agreeing to pay off a $1 million debt to a jeweler in installments. Think about what that means. Years after the toilet video, years after the $13 courtroom admission, years after the bankruptcy filing, Broner was still dealing with the financial residue of the exact lifestyle that got him into trouble in the first place. The jewelry that once defined his image had become another bill he couldn't pay off in full. At the same time, Broner found himself tangled up in someone else's legal storm, one with far bigger numbers attached. His longtime advisor, Al Haymon, the powerful boxing manager who's guided the careers of numerous world champions, became the subject of a massive fraud lawsuit. Reporting on the situation places the scale of that case at roughly a $340 million fraud lawsuit, a number that dwarfs every individual judgment Broner has faced personally. And in the middle of his own financial freefall, Broner chose to publicly back Haymon, standing by the man who'd helped build his career, even as that same manager faced allegations on a scale Broner himself could never touch. It's a strange kind of loyalty when you think about it. Here's a fighter who can't pay a $1 million jewelry bill in one lump sum, publicly defending an advisor accused of fraud in the hundreds of millions. But it says something about how Broner has always operated. Loyalty to the people around him, sometimes at the expense of his own financial self-interest. And that loyalty theme runs through Broner's relationship with money in general. Remember, this is a man who has repeatedly cited family obligations as part of why the money disappeared. He's spoken about supporting 10 kids. He's talked about friends and family leaning on him for help. In a sport where a fighter's payday often has to stretch across an entire extended network of people, Broner's setup left very little room for saving, let alone building the kind of long-term wealth his career earnings should have supported. Then there's the promoter relationship that's defined much of his recent career, Don King, where Haymon represented Broner during his rise. King became central to his attempts at a comeback in the mid-2020s as Broner tried to find his way back to relevant paydays. And it's in the context of that relationship that some of Broner's most direct public admissions about money came out. Speaking candidly about his financial situation while a fight under King's promotion was in the works, Broner didn't hide from where he stood. He said, "I love Don King so much. I'm still trying to become world champion under his umbrella. But the way things are going right now, I've got to think about myself, 'cause he's already a billionaire and I ain't got a damn dime." Read that quote again. This is a fighter directly comparing himself to a billionaire promoter and pointing out the gap in blunt terms. It's not a joke or a bit for the cameras. It's Broner explaining, in his own words, exactly how far apart his financial reality is. From the people around him in the sport, he kept going, describing the pressure directly. He talked about how he could call some of his close friends for money, but that his pride got in the way, calling the situation diabolical and asking people to make it make sense. And then, in the same breath, he brought his kids into it, describing a fight date falling through and admitting he wasn't asking for a handout, but if he had nowhere to stay or no fight date, he'd have to figure out another way to take care of his 10 kids and family. That's the picture by the middle of this decade. A former 4-division world champion, publicly torn between pride and desperation. watching a promised comeback fight collapse, and talking openly about how far he'd have to go to provide for his family. The jeweler's installment plan, the Haymon lawsuit swirling in the background, the Don King fight that fell apart. All of it landed at roughly the same time, compounding a financial situation that had already been unstable for years. And when that comeback fight died, Broner didn't quietly disappear to regroup. He turned, like a lot of struggling public figures do now, to social media as an actual source of income. He revealed he was broke, forcing him to sell Instagram story promotions for $350 to support his family. Not sponsorship deals with Nike or Monster Energy anymore. Individual paid shoutouts, sold directly off his own account, priced at a few $100s a post. It's worth pausing on how far that number has fallen from where this story started. A fighter who once earned a $5 million purse for a single fight was now pricing his own Instagram posts at $350 a piece, just to keep some income flowing while his comeback plans fell apart. His frankness highlighted a stark reality for one of boxing's former stars. Despite winning championship gold and achieving global fame, financial pressures had compelled him to turn to social media as a primary source of revenue. The jeweler debt, the Haymon lawsuit, the King fight collapse, the Instagram promotions, none of these are separate stories. They're the same financial collapse, just showing up in different corners of Broner's life at the same time. And they were about to collide with something even more public. The moment his personal struggles stopped staying behind courtroom doors and social media posts and started playing out live, on camera, in real time. If the courtroom admissions and the Instagram begging were Broner's financial collapse becoming public, what happened next was that collapse becoming unavoidable. Captured live, streamed, clipped, and shared across boxing media within hours. It started with a night out that ended in a very public, very messy scene. Video surfaced online of Broner attempting to leave a restaurant without settling a bill reportedly totaling $2,200. Instead of paying it in full, he handed over what cash he had on him, in a crumpled state, and according to reporting on the incident, told the staff, "That's all I can give." The footage showed him in a heated back and forth with both restaurant staff and police, visibly intoxicated, at one point saying, "Y'all can get a party from me, coo? Why am I bleeding? Y'all taking me or what? I ain't did nothing. You'll get your money tomorrow." That single video captured almost everything this story is about in one scene. A former champion, publicly unable to cover a bill that would have been pocket change. During his peak years, trying to talk his way out of paying it, in front of a phone camera that was never going to stop recording. The legal fallout from that night added yet another line to Broner's already long list of court dates. He reportedly pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and unlawful restraint in the same case, and was placed on probation as a result. But even that didn't hold. He was placed on 2 years of probation, which he soon violated, and was taken into custody for DUI, which sent him back behind bars. So by this point, you've got the nightclub judgment, the bankruptcy filing, the jeweler debt, the Haymon lawsuit, the skipped restaurant bill, a probation violation, and a DUI arrest, all layered on top of each other, all playing out over a handful of years, while Broner kept trying, and failing, to find his way back to a stable comeback. Then came 2026, and the story shifted platforms again, this time to live streaming, where a new kind of internet fame runs directly on chaos, attention, and often exploitation of people who are clearly struggling. Broner started appearing regularly on streams, with a streamer known as Dean the Great, and what played out over the following weeks became some of the most uncomfortable footage of his entire public life. He appeared on multiple streams with Dean the Great, posted emotional videos on Instagram, and was involved in confrontations during stream sessions in Las Vegas. One night in particular stood out. A stream segment from Las Vegas in mid-April drew the most concern, when Broner was physically prevented from getting behind the wheel. After a long night out, then squared up to multiple men in a parking lot before backing down. This wasn't a scripted boxing storyline or a promotional stunt. This was a former world champion being physically stopped from driving, getting into a confrontation in a parking lot, all captured and broadcast live to whoever was watching the stream. And then came the moment that gave this whole era its name, the Uber video. Still appearing on stream with Dean the Great, Broner was caught on camera asking for money and help to secure an Uber ride, clearly not in a good state. It was obvious Broner wasn't in great shape, yet the people around him kept the camera on him until he asked them to stop filming. That last detail is worth sitting with. A man who once flushed $100 bills down a toilet for a social media post, who once earned $5 million in a single night in Las Vegas, was now asking people around a live stream to help pay for a car ride home, and the people filming him kept the camera rolling until he told them to stop. The reaction across boxing media was immediate, and it wasn't really about the boxing anymore. The conversation outside the ring had become louder than anything happening inside it. Outlets covering the story started asking harder questions, not just about Broner's finances, but about the people around him. Several outlets pointed to the streamers around Broner and questioned whether the camera was helping or hurting him, echoing recent discussions about other former champions struggling in their post-prime years. That's an important shift in the story. For years, Broner's financial collapse played out through lawsuits, judgments, and his own social media posts, moments where he had at least some control over how the story was told. The live stream era removed even that. Now Broner was a subject being filmed by other people, for other people's audiences, with his own struggles becoming the content itself. Whether or not that setup was designed to help him, it clearly wasn't designed to protect him. Zoom out and look at the total shape of what's happened financially to Broner across roughly a decade. He earned career purses reportedly totaling in the tens of millions. He earned $5 million in one night against Manny Pacquiao alone. He landed endorsement deals with major global brands. And by the mid-2020s, tracking sites converged on an estimate that put his actual net worth at around only a low six-figure number, sometimes around $100,000, with some accounts suggesting it may be even lower than that. Once his debts and judgments are weighed against whatever assets remain, it's the kind of number that doesn't need much extra commentary. A career that generated 8 figures in earnings ended up producing a net worth that a lot of working professionals could match after a decade or two of steady saving. The difference is that Broner made his money in a handful of nights, inside a boxing ring, and it still wasn't enough to survive the decade that followed. So where does that leave things now, with the lawsuits, the debts, the streams, and a former champion who's been asking strangers for Uber money? That's where this story sits today, and it's not entirely finished being written. Every thread in this story, the Cleveland judgment, the bankruptcy filing, the jeweler debt, the Heyman lawsuit, the skipped restaurant bill, the live stream chaos, is still, in some form, unresolved. That's what makes Broner's situation different. From a story with a clean ending, there's no single moment where the money came back, or where the debts got settled, or where the comeback fight finally happened and fixed everything. Instead, there's a pattern that's kept repeating, with new chapters added roughly every few months. Take the comeback attempts themselves. Broner has talked more than once about wanting to fight his way back to relevance and financial stability. He spent time in Las Vegas specifically to train and regroup, with reporting describing him trying to regroup ahead of a touted return before those plans fell apart and left him scrambling for income yet again. Fight dates get floated, promotional plans get announced, and then, repeatedly, they collapse before fight night, leaving Broner back where he started, just older and further from his prime. Even in the middle of the very public struggles, Broner has continued to insist the boxing part of his story isn't over. Talking about a past opponent after a loss, he pushed back on the idea that his career was finished, saying even though he lost his last fight, no disrespect, that opponent still wasn't a bigger draw than he was. It's the same competitive voice that built the About Billions persona in the first place, still present even as the financial reality around him has completely changed. And that's maybe the strangest part of this whole story. The bravado hasn't disappeared, even as the bank account has. Broner still talks like a star. He still name-drops his own draw, his own fame, his own ability to make a fortune if given the chance. Back when he first filed for bankruptcy and was explaining his return to the ring, he was direct about his motivation, telling reporters that even without pending legal cases against him, He'd still be training and ready to get back and make a fortune because he believed he'd been given real talent and a real blessing. That mindset hasn't gone anywhere, even years later, even after the Uber video, even after the streams. Meanwhile, the debts that built this story are still sitting there. The jeweler installment plan is presumably still being paid off, one payment at a time. The Heyman fraud case is still working through the legal system, with Broner's name attached to it only by association and loyalty, not by direct allegation. The original Cleveland civil judgment, whichever exact figure you land on, between $780,000 and $855,000, was never fully paid off in the traditional sense. It was maneuvered around through a bankruptcy filing that itself drew scrutiny. None of these threads have a tidy resolution. They're just quieter than they used to be, until the next headline brings them back up. What's changed most is the platform. Broner's financial story started in courtrooms and moved through social media begging posts, but it's landed, for now, on live streams. A format that turns real struggle into real-time content for an audience that may or may not actually care about the person at the center of it. The concern that outlets have raised about the streamers around him isn't just about Broner specifically. It's part of a wider question boxing media has started asking about how the internet treats former champions once their prime years are behind them. Whether the cameras that follow them around are actually trying to help or just profiting off the spectacle of a public breakdown. For Broner himself, the tone of his own posts has shifted too, where the early begging posts had a kind of defiant humor to them, asking for $10 or $13 at a time, almost daring people to laugh. The more recent moments have carried a heavier weight. He's posted emotional videos on Instagram that read less like a hustle and more like a man genuinely struggling on camera, in real time. The distance between the guy who filmed himself flushing $100 bills for a joke and the guy asking a live stream for Uber money isn't just about the number in his bank account. It's about how publicly and how repeatedly that number has been put on display. Boxing has plenty of stories about fighters who made fortunes and lost them. What makes Broner's version stick is how documented every single step of it has been. Court filings with exact dollar figures, quotes from his own mouth about billionaires and dimes, videos of the money itself being destroyed, and now live streams capturing the aftermath in real time. There's no missing chapter here. Every stage of the fall has its own receipt. Whether Broner gets another meaningful fight, whether the jeweler debt gets fully paid off, whether the Heyman case resolves in a way that touches him at all, those are still open questions. What isn't in question is the size of the collapse itself. A fighter who once earned $5 million in a single night, who built an entire persona around the idea of billions, ended up on a live stream, asking for help covering a car ride. That's not a rumor, and it's not a single bad night blown out of proportion. It's the documented, repeated, multi-year result of a career's worth of money, running out faster than anyone, maybe even Broner himself, expected it to. For now, the cameras are still rolling, the streams are still happening, and the man once known as about billions is still out there, trying to find his way back to whatever comes next.